you sure you want to start the live video event? Yes. Good evening, community members. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Pre-K to Adult Instructional Programs and Pathways, the IPP, and this is our virtual community meeting number 1. We will also hold the same virtual community meeting number 2 on February the 17th, same time. For any of you, for any folks that you know could not have made it tonight. We know that there's a lot going on, so we really appreciate you being here tonight. Thanks for bearing with me. I wanted to make sure I'm Gladys Bourdouin, by the way, Integrated Project Planner with Arlington Public Schools, and I'll be serving as moderator once we get to the Q&A during our meeting, which is going to be after the presentation in this virtual time that we have together. You will be hearing from some presenters tonight. With us is Bridget Loft, our Assistant Superintendent of the Department of Teaching and Learning, and Jonathan Teresi, our Director of Strategic Planning with Planning and Evaluation. I wanted to go over some logistics. I'll be looking for your questions and comments on the Q&A box. Make sure to submit those. And those are going to be addressed at the end of the presentation that we have prepared for you tonight. I want to mention to the interpreters that are listening in to please type in the questions that you're receiving that come into you in the Q&A box as well. And that is the way that we will receive them and address them. For any folks that are listening that are unable to access the chat for any reason, sometimes it's the browser, sometimes it's the phone. We have heard 1 or 2 people not being able to do that. I want to make sure that we get your questions and comments too. And what you can do, please, is send those to engage@apsva.us. engage@apsva.us. We will definitely get those and we will answer you directly. You can always do that at any time. Just please put on the subject IPP, and then that way you'll get that answer faster. So right now, I'm actually going to turn it over to Bridget Loft, so just give us a few seconds while we do some switcheroos. Thank you. Jonathan, if you could access the PowerPoint, that'd be great. Oh, and you're on mute.
Okay, is it showing on your end, Gladys?
Not yet. I see you.
Okay. The PowerPoint is projecting on my end.
Well, maybe we won't be able to do that after all. Is it projecting for you?
It is.
Oh, okay.
I can try one more time. I'll cycle my screen.
Okay.
Let me try one more time. Let me see here.
Thanks, folks.
Any luck now, Gladys?
No, I think what I will do is try to access that PowerPoint. Thank you, folks, for your patience. That's all right. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try this. Thanks, folks. Let's give us 1 second. Now I'm going to try to access. I believe that no, that's not the right one. Thank you, folks. Oh my goodness. All right. Trying to, it is not working for me. Come on. Oh, there we go.
We can see it, Gladys.
Okay, great. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bridget. Bridget, if you could just let me know specifically next, and I will do that. To go to the next slide.
Absolutely, not a problem. So I'm good to go to start then?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm really pleased and excited to share with you the updates regarding the Instructional Programs and Pathways, also known as the IPP. We'll be first talking about the framework of the IPP, which has been in process this year in development. And then I'll turn the mic over to Jonathan Teresi, who will talk about several initiatives that are going through the IPP cycle. So you'll see on our agenda, we've got a couple of recaps from our December updates, the purpose and goals of the IPP and the IPP visioning process. And then what we're bringing to you that is new is the existing APS programs, criteria, evaluation, and audits that have been conducted. Well, Jonathan will be sharing suggestions from instructional leaders and the community engagement process. Next. And next, please. So let's talk about what the IPP is. It's really a framework that defines the role of our neighborhood schools, our option schools, and all of our instructional programs. And it does something that we haven't ever done before, which is really provide a comprehensive list and a description of our current instructional programs and options. And I want to emphasize that that's pre-K to adult in a centralized location. It also provides a clear instructional vision for the future that aligns with the APS mission and vision, the strategic plan, and the new equity policy. So this could include recommendations to expand current programs or change them, to create new programs or move programs to new sites, to bring together, to consolidate programs, or to eliminate programs. It also identifies criteria for assessing the instructional programs in the IPP. So our existing programs will be assessed as part of components of our APS program evaluation. And then before we institute new programs, they'll be screened through this process within the IPP. Next, please. So I want to emphasize why it's important. It's really important that we have a framework for making decisions around instructional visioning that will inform our planning initiatives. So things such as the Capital Improvement Plan, or known as the CIP, boundary processes, and the Arlington Facilities and Student Accommodation Plan. So instruction is leading the way of that planning. It will also inform and be informed by instructional processes, including curriculum development, program evaluations, and the program of studies. And one of our strategic plan goals is to provide multiple pathways to student success. So the IPP defines our current options for students, as well as our vision for the future to help identify these pathways. Another reason why the IPP is important is the alignment with the strategic plan, the Virginia profile of a graduate, the new equity policy, and it really reflects our commitment to ensuring equity and access while also providing educational excellence for our students, whether they attend a neighborhood school or a specific instructional program or option. Next. So our goals are to ensure equity and access in all of our programs, to ensure multiple pathways to student success, and we want to strengthen those pathways for existing programs and look to create additional pathways. We want to promote demographic diversity in our programs and schools and assist with managing enrollment at all school levels. Next. So I want to talk with you next about our existing APS programs, and you'll see them here on a chart. Now, the first thing I want to emphasize is that APS is committed to inclusion. So just because we've separated out our English learner programs and our special education programs should not indicate that these are separate and standalone away from the general education programs. In most cases, they are part of the same school, and many the students attend similar classes as their education peers, and are often in the same classrooms as their education peer or their general education peers. It's really meant to put all of our existing programs in one place so that folks can understand that we offer quite a lot for our students. So you'll see in the first row the description or the listing of our options for our general education, and that's again pre-K through adult. You'll see in the middle row the English learner programs that are available elementary school to adult. And I do want to emphasize that we pulled these strands out because we have been spending a lot of time thinking about and visioning for our English learner programs, excuse me, and our special education programs through the 5-year action plan. So I'll take the next slide, please. So part of what's important is to be able to identify criteria for programs, and we really haven't done that in a holistic fashion before. So the IPP allows us to have an objective set of program criteria, and we're in the process of developing that now and plan to be able to share that with the school board in March. It also allows us to really evaluate the efficacy of our programs. And so we do have an existing program evaluation process that we'll use to inform and to develop the evaluation of many of our programs. And there are several iterations of how this can happen. So for example, the World Languages Program Evaluation, which has just been completed and will be posted online tomorrow, already includes our dual language immersion program. So that when we conducted our evaluation of the World Languages Program, we were able to also evaluate what is strong and what needs work with our dual language immersion program. In other cases, it may be that we need a separate program evaluation, and once we come back to more normal times, we'll be able to create a timeline for this work. And then there are recommendations from program evaluations that inform our visioning process, and you'll see there an example of our 5-year action plan for our students with disabilities and those requiring interventions. Next slide, please. So another thing that's new to the IPP is that we've really taken a lot of focus on conducting an audit of our current instructional programs, and that includes a 3-year trend of the number of students enrolled, the demographics of those students, where their assigned neighborhood school is, and using information from the APS Options and Transfers webpage that includes the number of applicants for each program and the number of students on the wait list. And that's really, first of all, something else that's new is that we have an IPP Engage page. So all that information is published to the Engage page. And that information really helps us in identifying specific groups that may be under or overrepresented in certain programs, and in identifying opportunities to do targeted outreach to ensure that our community is aware of existing programs and how to access them. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk a bit about the cycles that are related to the visioning process. So I really want to emphasize this first cycle is showing you the work that we've done this school year. And I want to emphasize that the IPP is never sort of done. It's a dynamic and fluid process that gets updated at different parts of the year as we develop and then implement and then evaluate and make refinements. So I'll walk you through, if you look at the top under at the circle with the 2020 underneath it, we really started with our instructional leaders to be thinking about what are some of the issues that need to be addressed this year. And that happened in summer and into September. And then we met with the school board as we began to develop the IPP framework that I've just described. Then we followed back in November to meet with instructional leaders. In December, we gave updates to our community, our advisory committees, CCPTA, and other community members. We circled back in January for a series of work sessions with our instructional leaders to really focus on 5 different areas that they identified as really needing our time and attention this year. We shared a monitoring report with the school board just last week. And as you're here now, you know that we've kicked off our community engagement process, and we'll continue to meet with advisory committees, CCPTA, and community members. We'll be, Dr. Duran will be sharing a monitoring report in March to the school board, where we'll be making recommendations for many of the items that Jonathan will talk with you about tonight. And then once we do that in March, we're back to the races in April and June, where our instructional leaders are identifying new programs, options, and other issues that need to be addressed by the IPP. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see then the ongoing cycle. So if you remember, I indicated that the IPP is dynamic. It never sort of stops. So what you see in this chart is a description of how we really the cycle of the IPP. So again, we start with visioning sessions with instructional leaders and meetings with the school board in summer and September. We finalize the instructional leaders' proposals for changes and perhaps for new programs in October, and we share that with the school board. And then we bring that information back out to the community in November and come back with our instructional leaders in December. And then we do another monitoring report to really help inform the budget and the CIP in mid-January. I'm going to stop because I left something out. We take ourselves back to October. That's really a strategic decision to start to cue the school board to issues that we think need to be addressed within the IPP. Because as we all know, the budget process doesn't really begin in January. We begin thinking about what changes might be necessary as early as the fall. So we start in October, so that by the time we're doing our monitoring report to inform the budget and the CIP, the school board has heard about our thinking, the community has had an opportunity to weigh in, our instructional leaders have had an opportunity to weigh in. And then after that, we continued the development and refinement of the IPP and the issues on which we've chosen to focus in March through the summer, and we start that cycle again. So at this point, I'm going to pass the baton on to Jonathan.
All right. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So as Bridget mentioned, this fall and early winter, we had discussions and visioning sessions with our instructional leaders. We got together some suggestions and shared those at the monitoring report, and I'm going to share them with the community tonight. The month of February is really dedicated to getting input and feedback from our stakeholders, and then bringing that back to our leaders to help shape the superintendent's recommendations to the school board, which will happen at the end of March. The implementation, if a vision is adopted and it's a direction that we decide to go as a school system and the school board, we will begin a timeline for implementation, talking about resources needed, and continuing that input process to keep the community informed. Communications about the implementation timing and details will be shared throughout the planning process. Next slide, please. So in the fall, instructional leaders, principals, our Department of Teaching and Learning directors, supervisors, and specialists, and our directors of counseling participated in sessions to establish some focus areas. As we know, with the pandemic, there's circumstances of this year to need to prioritize what we focus on this year amidst all of the other planning that is needed to ensure high quality instruction this year. So the 5 areas that we instructional leaders identified was the Ed Center, looking at the additional capacity that will be available at that site, and we'll talk more about that. The alternative and special ed programs at the secondary level, at the Langston program, the 45-day academic academy, new directions, teen parenting, the PEP program, which is the program for employed preparedness at the Career Center, and our Shriver program that is at the Heights location. So instructional leaders did consider and discuss whether co-locating or consolidating any of those programs would help strengthen the program and align with our vision and mission and strategic plan goals. That was another topic that was discussed, talking about the role of neighborhood schools and how do they fit into the IPP. As we know, the majority of our students, about 75–80%, will attend a neighborhood school through their K-12, pre-K-12 experience. Instructional leaders also talked about the English learner programs at Langston, the Career Center, Arlington Community High School, and HB Woodlawn, specifically honing in on the programs. These are programs that predominantly serve our 18 to 22-year-old students, many who have entered APS at age 17 or later. There are some students outside of that range, but the core of these programs are really our students in the 18 to 22-year-old range, and looking again at consideration if co-locating or consolidating would strengthen, would achieve our goals as a division, and again, a vision as a school system. So the last topic they discussed was middle school seats and looking at the vision for some of our seat needs in the 3 to 5 year window, and also helping manage enrollment given our growing enrollment and capacity challenges that we're experiencing. So we're going to highlight in the next couple of slides some of the suggestions that instructional leaders put forth, and then talk a little bit about the community engagement process. Next slide, please. The suggestions shared in the following slides, they were developed, again, as I alluded to a little bit previously, with the goal of meeting the following objectives. Would it strengthen the program? Would it meet the needs of the students it serves? Would it align with our core values and strategic plan goals? Would it strengthen the existing instructional pathway or create a new pathway for students? And would it offer some potential cost savings and efficiencies in one or more areas as we look at staffing, facilities, transportation? The suggestions you'll hear about would be considered for implementation in 2022 or later, and inclusion in our budget and capital planning. Some of the suggestions would have a larger time horizon as they need to be built into our capital planning process. But again, we wanted to just really emphasize none of what you're going to hear about tonight would be for implementation next year. We would have a planning process, and 2022 would be the earliest. Please note that the final recommendations you will hear about the final recommendations will be included in the March following the community engagement process in February and us going back with our instructional leaders. Next slide, please. So the Ed Center, as instructional leaders discussed and looked at projections and looked at the Ed Center, one of the ideas and suggestions from instructional leaders that had support was using one floor of the Ed Center. There are 5 floors there, using one floor of that for a virtual learning program for students at the secondary level. Some have asked, why would we need any space for a virtual learning program? And one thing we'll share and talk about is that the virtual learning program, the visioning for that would continue. That could include full distance learning, hybrid courses. So there would be a need for some physical space as that vision is further developed. So just to answer kind of that question that we've gotten recently. In terms of our alternative and special ed programs, the suggestion from instructional leaders as they considered the range of possibilities was co-locating Academic Academy with Langston at the Langston site was one of the suggestions. As we looked at our English learner programs at Langston, the Career Center, Arlington Community High School, and HB Woodlawn, the decision was we really needed a vision process to dig in deeper and develop a clearer vision for these programs before instructional leaders were able to determine if co-locating or consolidating would achieve those goals I mentioned on the previous slide. Neighborhood schools, again, they're the core of APS. 75 to 80% of our students will attend a neighborhood school through their pre-K to 12 experience. They serve as a community hub for learning and other activities that help bring the community together. It's an important message to really help reinforce that. Next slide. In terms of middle school seats, some of the ideas that suggestions instructional leaders that had support were making Montessori Public School of Arlington a pre-K to 8 school. It's currently a pre-K to 5 school. The grades 6 to 8 Montessori program is currently housed at Gunston. And so the idea was to combine it and make a unified school pre-K to 8. A future CIP, capital improvement plan, would consider an opportunity to co-locate it with a middle school. And the reason for that is that would ensure that particularly those middle school students, upper middle school students, would have access to a range of courses taught by teachers with secondary level certification. So if there was a student in 8th grade who might need Algebra 2, being near a middle school would allow them access to traditionally high school course that all of our neighborhood middle schools offer. Aligning programs with their K-12 feeder schools that are equitable countywide by considering whether a program move or an expansion to an additional site would improve access to the program, particularly for our communities that are traditionally underserved. So really continuing to dive in deeper and looking strategically at these programs and opportunities. Creating a virtual learning program for our secondary students, similar to what you saw with the Ed Center suggestion, as another means to help meet some of our seat needs and vision for our middle school students who are successful in this model and may prefer to continue learning in it. And also to look at reopening the art and communication technology program at Kenmore back up to the lottery and allowing transfers from outside the Kenmore zone as it once did years ago. So those were the 4 suggestions from our instructional leaders in regards to middle school seats. Next slide, please. So in terms of community engagement, the feedback we are seeking for the community is really in one of these 4 areas. As we think about some of the principles and themes from the suggestions, they really center around these 4 areas: realigning, co-locating, or combining some programs, creating a K-8 school through realigning a program when funding is feasible through the capital planning process, creating a virtual learning program for secondary students, and making programs within neighborhood secondary schools available as countywide options for students when it's operationally feasible, building capacity and transportation. Community input on these areas is going to be most helpful to instructional leaders in our planning. As we continue to move forward in this process, these principles apply to several areas that we can use as a guide. And so we really didn't want to hone in too specifically to the suggestions, as some of these programs may be unfamiliar to most members of our community. And so as we get feedback on these principles and guiding these areas, it will really help inform our continued planning, both in this cycle and in future IPP cycles. The community questionnaire will provide community members, again, an opportunity to provide feedback on the 4 general areas above to help guide and inform our planning. And staff will be engaging in targeted outreach to school communities that would be most directly impacted by suggestions. So we will have some meetings that will be available to the public and providing opportunities for specific communities to share any questions or feedback that they may have. Community feedback will be considered by APS staff as they prepare their final recommendations to the superintendent, which again, the superintendent's recommendations will be shared at the end of March for this cycle. Next slide, please. So some of the specific dates, we have a community questionnaire that will be launching early next week. We had hoped to have it today, but the translation will need a few more days just to we want to really make sure that it's accessible to our community. And so we are going to make it available in 5 languages. So we just need a few more days on that, but that will be available early next week and will be open for about 2 weeks. The virtual community presentation and staff virtual open office hour will happen. Our first is tonight, and as Gladys mentioned at the start, next Wednesday we'll have another session. We'll do the same information and continue to provide that simultaneous interpretation. And that will be recorded and posted online as well. So if anyone misses it, you can log back in and get it from the Ipp Engage page. We'll also have some virtual open office hours. And some of these, again, may be tailored to specific communities. They will be publicly accessible to all, but they may be topic specific as we look at reaching out to those specific communities. Again, these will also be recorded and posted online. Next slide, please. So again, our APS Engage page continues to be the information hub of key information about the IPP process, our engagement activities, our timeline, frequently asked questions, and any presentation and recordings of community meetings and resources will be made available there. We will continue to use a variety of channels to reach the community meetings, our staff open office hours, news releases, school talk, social media, Facebook, and more, to really ensure that we're communicating in a medium that helps reach our community. Information resources were shared with our bilingual family resource assistants, and we will continue to work closely with them to help reach, again, members of our community to engage in the process and ensure everyone knows where to access the materials. I think that, oh, one more slide, next slide, please. So just to give you a preview of post-March, so after we conclude this cycle, as we look ahead to our next IPP cycle, we do have a couple items on the docket already. The first we kind of mentioned earlier was our dual language immersion program. The World Language Program Evaluation is now complete, and that has an abundance of data and information to really help guide and inform a visioning process for our dual language immersion program. Another topic is the Career Center site. There's been some prior work there and some additional work this winter, and we will be continuing to dive back into that work to really help deliver a vision for the Career Center site. Additional areas may be identified as priority areas as well, and will be communicated along with opportunities for community input during this process. So just a little preview of next steps in our work ahead. That concludes the presentation. I'm going to turn it back to Gladys, and we'll begin the questions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yes, I just want to remind folks. One second here. Oops. Hello again, so you can see my face. I just want to remind folks that if you have comments or questions, please go ahead and submit them on the Q&A box. Thank you so much. We'll be watching out for those, and then I will be asking those questions. So right now, Bridget, I have a question for you. So get ready. So Bridget, currently APS is reworking the IPP framework. Once the framework is approved, it will be used each year to guide the annual cycle of evaluation programs. Oops, sorry, that's a comment. It's not a question. Could you give us some details on what the virtual learning program might look like?
Sure. So the virtual learning program is really an outgrowth of our experience in distance learning, having started the year and spent a good 6 months in this distance learning model. We've come to understand that there are students who really benefit from participating in virtual learning and are much more comfortable in that venue. And we know that many of our teachers have acclimated to delivering instruction via distance learning in a way that will certainly help these students who perhaps benefit more from learning virtually. And so the suggestion to locate a virtual learning program at on one floor of the education center, which is serving as an annex to Washington Liberty, is really an outgrowth of that understanding. I do need to emphasize that we do feel like we need a sort of brick and mortar location for this virtual program, because students may not be learning fully virtually. It's possible that they could participate in a hybrid experience where some of their classes are online and some are in person. And we know that it is likely that the students would benefit from having access to social emotional support from live people, from a human counselor who is accessible in person, perhaps a social worker or a psychologist as well, because the support of students' social emotional growth is really important and often is best supported in person. We also feel that perhaps it would be helpful to have some educational supports there. So perhaps teachers who could be on call for consult, or some teachers might be delivering instruction in person in that particular hybrid model in which kids are have some classes virtually and some classes in person. So that's really the rationale for having the bricks and mortar space for that virtual program.
Thank you, Bridget. I actually, the very first comment, it's more of a clarification. So I'm going to give you the comment. Sorry, no, that was my mistake. I'm going to give you a comment. If you could please clarify to make sure that it's correct. Please clarify what I think I heard. Currently, APS is reworking the IPP framework. Once the framework is approved, it will be used each year to guide the annual cycle of evaluation programs, adding or changing or deleting programs, developing the budget each year.
Right. You know, I think that's a really good distillation of the first part of our presentation. It's taken a good 6 months to really identify the pillars of the framework of the IPP. And if you recall, those pillars are the identification of all of our programs and options, the audit that was conducted so we know who our kids are who are engaging in programs, and so that we can also start to look at enrollment trends, those students who are underrepresented or overrepresented in specific programs, for example, the development of the criteria for the evaluation of the options and programs, and then the visioning, the thinking about how can we evaluate how effectively our options and programs reflect the strategic plan, reflect the profile of the graduate, our new equity policy, and our mission and vision. So that's really the framework, and we have been working on that to ensure that I think of it as building the foundation of a house. Once we've got the framework in place, then we can build above that and really use the pillars of the framework to help evaluate specific programs. So those programs that Jonathan just outlined are what we'll be using. We'll be using the framework to evaluate them and then to make some decisions moving forward.
Thank you, Bridget. Jonathan? Jonathan, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Thank you. What kind of input do you hope to get, and how will this input be used?
Great. And Gladys, since you have the PowerPoint so projected, could you go back a few slides? We have a great slide on that, and I can kind of elaborate a little bit more. Just back up. There's this is what impact. I think it's about 4 or 5 slides back.
Okay, just give me a minute.
There we go, right there. So on the as we mentioned, the suggestions that we shared kind of fall into one of 4 areas, so to speak. And so it looks at realigning, co-locating, or combining some programs. Again, when it meets the goals and needs of the students it serves, aligns with our strategic plan goals, and potentially offers some cost savings and strengthening our pathways. So we really getting input on that about this concept of realigning and co-locating, combining programs will help as we think, because there are many programs, as we showed in the presentation, that instructional leaders were discussing. You know, and that's one area. The idea of a K-8 school, and realigning a program when funding is feasible, getting community input on that concept and vision. Creation of a virtual learning program for secondary students. Again, that's another area to get kind of community input and sentiment on that vision. Making programs with the neighborhood secondary schools available as countywide options. So the suggestion we shared tonight that instructional leaders had was about the art and communication technology program at Kenmore. But we're looking for input more broad than just that one specific area. Just in general, what is the community feelings on and support for making a program with the neighborhood schools available as countywide options? Again, as we continue in our planning and look beyond just the specific things you heard about tonight, these benchmarks and input will really help drive our work and inform our work moving forward to see in these broad areas and buckets. So this feedback will then be used and shared with our instructional leaders. We will be meeting back with them in March, and they will be preparing their final recommendations to the superintendent. The superintendent will review the input, and he will be making his recommendations to the school board in March. So it's a multi-step process, but the input will be shared and used and prepared and shared with the school board as well throughout this process. So we will be gathering that and really focusing on those 4 areas. There is an opportunity on the questionnaire and through Engage. If there's any other comments relative to the IPP, you know, that people can share that. Any other feedback that may have not been captured can be shared with us as well. And so we will look at that input as we compile it across the division.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can you please share more about the timeline and what will be in the March 24th recommendations to the school board? For example, will it include a recommendation as to whether to create a K-12 Montessori Academy at MSPA be made to the school board on March 25th? Mm-hmm. And if yes, how soon would that happen?
Yeah, it could. What we shared tonight were suggestions. We are engaging in the community input engagement process through February. We will be bringing the input back to our instructional leaders, and they will continue to work in their groups with the DTL leaders and together. And so we don't know right now what will be exactly in that March 25th report. The engagement process is very important, and bringing that input back to our leaders and thinking. Continuing our visioning work. So these were suggestions tonight, and as we go through this process, we will culminate in some recommendations as we continue our work with leaders and looking at the input gathered.
Okay. Since I have you out there, just seem for the March 25th, is it only going to be staff recommendations that are presented? Will you present community engagement?
We will share a summary. We will share a summary of the community engagement and input that we gathered through this process. That will be provided, and it really is the superintendent's recommendations. Instructional leaders will be preparing their recommendations to the superintendent, and the superintendent will be delivering the recommendations to the school board on March 25th.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Bridget. Thank you. Thank you. And I hope this isn't a repeat. Let me know. What would a permanent virtual middle school program look like? Are you planning for a 5-day-a-week virtual school, or having middle school students still assigned to a middle school and a virtual a few days a week?
So no, I don't think it's a repeat. And it's I'm glad somebody raised this question, because I really want to emphasize that none of the proposals that Jonathan reviewed towards the end of the presentation will go into effect for the 21-22 school year. And we did that explicitly because we need to have time to think about just those kinds of questions. I mean, it's clear that I think that a middle school virtual program likely would look different from a high school virtual program, simply because the developmental needs of students of the ages that attend middle school are different than high school. And so we'd really need to be working with Department of Teaching and Learning staff, with instructional leaders to land on what would a middle school virtual program look like. I really want to emphasize that we have not sort of landed on the details of, would it be 5 days a week, would it be hybrid, etc. I think we would be in agreement, though, that we would need sort of that bricks and mortar space at the Ed Center annex to Washington Liberty, because it's I think we all would agree that it's important that the social emotional support, at the very least, needs to be available in person for those students. So if the virtual learning program becomes a recommendation in Dr. Duran's monitoring report at the March school board meeting, then that will signal that we need to then begin to do a lot of planning as it relates to some of the details of the virtual program.
Thank you. Thank you for this engagement. Oh, we actually already provided this. Somebody wanted to know where the audit was available online, and we have answered that question. Thank you. I am actually waiting for some additional questions. Let me put myself live while I look. Thanks, folks, for your questions. I am looking through, just making sure that I have gotten through all of them. So if I look awkward because you're looking at my face, excuse me. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Let's see. Great. Jonathan, I think you can answer this one for me. Thank you so much, committee members, for your wonderful questions. Just want to make sure that I get to all of them. Jonathan, if the survey finds the community doesn't agree with the recommendations, how will you use that information? Does that mean you need to build a school? How can you make that shift?
Yeah, so the feedback we're seeking is on these principles here of a K-8 school. So as we get that input, that really will help inform our planning. And a lot of any K-8 school will need to be worked into our capital planning process, which is typically a 10-year kind of cycle. So as we, build and plan that out, any type of K-8 school is not going to happen in the next few years. This is something that would require really building into not only from the instructional standpoint, but from a funding standpoint as well in capital planning. So input will certainly play a role in these principles as we look holistically at the division. But it is important to just note that it's as much as it is an instructional vision, there's kind of the funding and the siting of it as well, and that we need to go in, and that's a much more involved process that's multi-year. So that will be an absolute component of that particular principle and vision.
Thank you, Jonathan. The current proposal does not appear to build on the IPP shown when Dr. Natras was at APS. Did those ideas go away?
No, and so we will. That's one of the things we will be bringing back to the March report. We are certainly looking the work that was done a few years ago It provided a base. As we looked at that work, it was really focused on our K-12 pathways, particularly for those that transcend school levels. So, for example, the IB program, which exists at the elementary, middle, and high school level, Immersion as well. So it really focused on 6 programs, and there was a recommendation out of that process to look at 3 additional programs: an early college high school, a hybrid high school, and then a fine art and performing arts program. So those were the 3 suggestions back then, and we took those to instructional leaders this fall. And as we were developing our priorities for this school year, instructional leaders considered them, but those 3 did not rise to the top for this particular cycle. All of the areas we put forth for the list we had about 15 or 16 items of things that needed to be addressed through visioning, and they will be worked into the cycle. I think that is really the power of this process. That is a dynamic, fluid cycle here. As we look at our needs, as looking at what's feasible, and as a division, and as we build in these evaluation component, as I mentioned with Immersion, this program evaluation on the world languages really provides us that critical opportunity to develop a vision for the Immersion program that carries us through for the next 5 to 7 years. And so once the vision for that is done, it's really about monitoring and implementation, and we can move on to visioning for other topics. So we are going to continue to incorporate that work from the previous years. This year, again, was a unique year with the pandemic, with distance learning and not being able to be in person. So we needed to really prioritize what we could accomplish this year, and some good work took place, and it really is kind of just the beginning of our continued work together. So we will be working those other visions and suggestions and pathways work into our future cycles.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bridget, I have a question for you. What is the role of the Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer in this work, and how will equity shape the recommendations?
Sure. So we've talked a lot about how our new equity policy plays a really strong role in the IPP, and that we hold the decision making within the IPP up to the equity policy to ensure that it is manifesting the various parts of the policy. The Chief Officer of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is involved in a variety of steps along the way. One step would be, for example, in the audit. So in the identification of students who might be underrepresented, or students who might be overrepresented in a particular program, and engaging with instructional leaders and the community to unpack that and to make some decisions to ensure that there are equitable opportunities and access to a variety of programs. So he would be working in concert with instructional leaders and would be paying close attention to the community feedback that we receive to help us ensure that that access, those pathways are demonstrative of our commitment to equity at each step of the way.
Thank you, Bridget. Jonathan mentioned that you would be using the 2019 draft IPP as the starting point for the work you are doing now. In that document, the traditional model was not listed as an option that would be continued to be offered by APS. What are you planning to do with the traditional model?
Right. So as I pointed out, there are several significant changes to the IPP as it existed in 2019. And one that you may not have recognized is the decision to highlight and identify all of the options and programs that we have available in APS. And so Gladys, are you able to flip back in the slideshow?
I am.
So I'd like you to go to the chart in which we've listed all of our options and programs. And I'm sorry, I don't have that slide number. It's earlier on. And while you're doing that, I'll sort of continue to kind of talk about that. Oh, wait, I'm watching you stop. Excellent. So I'll say, for example, when we look under and the general education row and under elementary school, Arlington Traditional is now highlighted as one of the existing programs in APS. And much like all of the other programs in, as noted in APS, that when we continue our cycling through of using the IPP to focus on various programs and needs, it is possible that we could land on Arlington Traditional to have some more investigation to see if ATS continues to support the profile of a graduate, our strategic plan, etc. So currently, there are not plans to do that. We are, as Jonathan indicated, we've got a long list of topics and programs that we'd like to focus on. But I do want to highlight that we value Arlington Traditional just as much as we value the other programs that are part of the offerings of APS, and we want to make sure that it is noted on this chart for all to see.
Thank you, Bridget. Jonathan? Thank you. How will community demand, as evidenced by the applications and waitlist numbers, factor into your considerations for the future of option programs?
Community demand is certainly one factor, but as we look at, as Bridget alluded to, our strategic plan goals, our mission, our vision, our pathways, the existing pathways we have, strengthening them. So really, those are really going to be a larger driver in terms of the instructional vision and mission, ensuring that it aligns with all of our goals, values as a school division. So demand is one piece. That's why we included the options and transfers. I think, you know, if there is a program that aligns, is also performance data. As we look at performance data, as we look at the alignment of the program with our mission, vision, and strategic plan goals and equity, and you couple that with a strong demand, I think there's a natural fit there to, you know, help inform decisions about the program. Demand in itself is one component, but really those instructional pieces about performance, about equity, about alignment with our strategic plan, those are going to be larger drivers in the decision-making process to ensure as we look at the programs and recommendations.
Thank you. Kenmore and TJ, Kenmore and Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, TJ, all of the above, used to be open to students countywide for the arts and communication programs and IB, respectively. Does the recommendation for Kenmore open the school back up to middle school students from all schools, or just students who are in the attendance zone?
So the suggestion from instructional leaders would be to open back up years ago that students from outside the Kenmore attendance zone would be able to apply, and if space permitting, if there was space and it was operationally feasible, that they would be able to access that program and transfer into Kenmore for that program. If the number of applicants exceeded the number of seats available, if it was, we would have a lottery. I think that was really the crux of the suggestion from instructional leaders, was to open it back up to students from outside. Kenmore students can currently access that program as exists in the school now. So it really would be for allowing students from outside the program was really what the suggestion was. And again, that was from an instructional standpoint. As we look at some of our elementary schools in South Arlington, for example, Drew has a STEAM curriculum and program that would feed, you know, in terms of a pathway into that art and technology program. So there could be some families and students who are interested if it was available and Kenmore had the space to accommodate those students, and also could provide some capacity relief to some of the neighboring elementary schools that are more over capacity.
Thank you. Jonathan, one more. Are the suggestions and recommendations focused on the use of existing seats or additional seats added through new buildings or additions?
So I think it's kind of a combination of both. For the Montessori example, that current site could not accommodate a K-8 the current building cannot accommodate a K-8. So there would be, for that particular suggestion, it would need to be built into the CIP process, and additional seats would be needed to be added to realize that vision in the future. Some of the suggestions are using existing seats. So I think it just varies from suggestion to suggestion, but I just give 2 examples of kind of the difference there.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bridget, I have a comment. If you could please share your thoughts. Many of the academic programs have gone through evaluations and recommendations are made to make improvements. In this community member's opinion, APS has struggled with the implementation of many recommendations, and sometimes the same issues are seen, years later. 7 years later. How will this process improve implementation of existing programs? This should be a priority for the IPP budget and equity issues.
Right, so I do want to point out that the program evaluations that have been conducted for the content areas and DTL, that the content areas themselves are provided K-12. So I'll use English language arts as an example. The content office is responsible for identifying curriculum, for identifying resources that can be used in concert with the curricula, to help with professional learning for teachers to use those resources, etc. But the implementation is happening with the boots on the ground, the teachers and administrators at each school. And so when there are recommendations within a program evaluation, many of those recommendations are implemented when they're under the control of the office. Where we start to find challenges with consistency is when those curricula and resources are implemented at the schools. And I will say we're starting to see a sea change there. That I think there's been a real recognition of the importance of systematization and consistency. And certainly during this pandemic, I think we've all come to understand and appreciate that it's important that the student's user experience is comparable across all schools. And so I'll use as an example the recognition on the Department of the Office of English Language Arts that our delivery of literacy instruction for our youngest learners and our assessment of our youngest learners' proficiency and growth as readers needed some help. And that really was an outgrowth of one of the program evaluation components. And so we are making that transition from using the PALS assessment to using DIBELS. And Dr. Duran talked about that in the monitoring report last board meeting, and Lori Silver, the supervisor of the English Language Arts, gave a really thorough description as to why we're making that transition. So I use that as, it's a lot of detail, but that's an example of the recognition that there was a need for change that was within the sort of control of the office, and that we're moving forward with that change. So then to kind of speak to how can we apply sort of the structure of the program evaluation to our options and to our programs? I think it's really important that the program evaluations begin by looking at what's working within the option, within that particular program, and what needs tweaking and what needs intervention. And the process that the program evaluation goes through is, working closely with the content supervisor. So if we extrapolated that to an option school or an existing program, then we'd be working closely with the principals in that regard, and identifying areas of need, and then conducting research, interviewing stakeholders, for example, looking at student achievement and learning outcomes, comparing or holding up the tenets of that particular program to our strategic plan, to the Virginia Profile of a Graduate, to the equity policy, to ensure that they're in alignment, and then making some decisions as to whether there needs to be some changes because of the discovery that they're out of alignment, or that student learning outcomes are not as robust as they might be if we were able to make some of those changes. So that should give you sort of a generalized understanding of how we would apply the tenets of the program evaluation to make sure that our programs are indeed reflecting our values as a community and supporting student learning outcomes in a way that best promotes student achievement.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Thank you for questions and comments. Jonathan. This appears to focus a lot on option schools and programs. Please provide some more information on how neighborhood schools will benefit from this plan.
Yes, so our neighborhood schools again really are the core of our APS instructional program. As we do this work, particularly around, I'll just use an example, our English learner programs. As we do our visioning work for those programs, there will be some takeaways that really help strengthen that program within. There could be lessons learned and instructional recommendations that are applicable across school sites and help strengthen the program for all students. So really this work is not so much in a silo. There will be, through these visioning sessions, recommendations that can be brought back to all schools that might make sense instructionally and help all of the schools meet some of the different needs they have. Many of our schools, our neighborhood schools, have exemplary projects and different focus areas. And as we look at the pathways and strengthening that continuum for students to continue in some of those areas, I referenced an example earlier of Drew Elementary School, who has the STEAM curriculum and program there. Those students who have get that experience as they look to build out, and if that's a program that works and is meeting the needs of the students, that's something that, as we look and engage with leaders to see if that's something we want to make available to all of our students across the various neighborhood schools. So really, I think the real value is, as we look at the evaluation, as we look at criteria, to really see to what extent are the various programs and options in our instructional model in general, such as the English learner programs, what lessons and takeaways can we then look to replicate if it's working and it's meeting the needs of the students and it makes sense for broader kind of scaling across the division. I think the possibilities are really vast in terms of helping drive and improve instruction across the division as we delve into this visioning process and delve into program criteria and using our evaluations to help drive improvement and alignment with our vision and goals.
Thank you, Jonathan. The Career Center 800-seat building was supposed to provide space for high school students. How is the IPP work going to address the need for high school seats?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, the question almost answered itself with our previous CIPs. We have built in the seats. There's funding in place and the continued visioning. Adding those seats at that site, it will help us meet the high school seat needs that we have in the 5 to 7 year horizon. And so there's continued work taking place with site studies and working with committees like JFAC and FAC to continue to identify as we look out beyond that horizon. But the Career Center site is going to be a big answer, along with the Ed Center coming online in 2 years, to helping us meet our high school seat needs over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think those two sites are really going to help meet our needs in terms of space and capacity for our high school students.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I have 2 more questions, and they're for Bridget. And I think these are going to be my last 2 questions. Bridget, how are student learning outcomes shaping this plan? Will this help get rid of our achievement gaps?
So I think it's important to emphasize that there's not one sort of solution that will help us close our opportunity gaps. The opportunity gaps are formed by a variety of factors, and while strong instruction, strong and responsive instruction, strong relationships between teacher and students are really fundamental to that. I think it's also important to recognize that if we have programs that are not providing a robust array of learning opportunities for our students, that don't allow our students to demonstrate proficiency in key concepts and to have pathways in order to do that, then those programs really need to be revisited. And that's exactly what the evaluation component of the IPP can do. I think also the audit of the programs that identified the demographics of students, identified the numbers of students on wait lists, etc., and also allows us to have a lens of, are there students who are underrepresented in a particular program, that those students who might really benefit from what those programs offer and don't have access to it because there have been obstacles put in the way for them to have access. And I think that's a really key component of the IPP, is identifying some of those obstacles and removing them so that students can access programs, and so that we can have an element of equity of access for programs as well. So I think in those two ways, the shining the light on programs that may not allow for students to access opportunities to achieve, and then also shining a light on if we've got access in the development, access to specific programs, will help to really dismantle those opportunity gaps.
Thank you, Bridget. If the IPP is coming back each year, explain how this is a vision.
Right. So I want to emphasize there's really kind of two parts of the IPP. There's the framework, and the framework provides that foundational structure for us to then be looking at particular programs or instructional issues that have arisen, so that we can kind of go through that cycle that we demonstrated on the slides at the end of the framework. So the visioning in and of itself is really the work that we're doing as we review the efficacy of particular programs. So I'll use as an example the dual language immersion visioning process. Is in process as part of the IPP, and will take particular focus of the IPP come April into the summer, and then landing in fall as we bring the recommendations forward to the board as part of that the IPP process. So that's a visioning process that has been embedded within the structural framework of the IPP, and that all of the initiatives or areas of focus that Jonathan reviewed have their own types of visioning that needs to occur. I'll go back to the question that came up regarding the virtual program and what does that look like for middle school students. Well, we need to do some visioning of that, should that become a recommendation that we move forward. Looking at the co-location of Academic Academy and the Lexington High School Continuation Program. We really need to do some visioning of how do we ensure that the Academic Academy students are well served because of that move. So that's really where I would argue the visioning occurs. It's on those specific programs or instructional issues that are brought forward in the IPP.
Thank you, Bridget. Actually, I have just one comment. One of them is you know, you already answered this, but it's sort of a comment. If a school, in this case ATS, has a long wait list, long enough to populate a second school, you know, would that be something that is considered?
It's
more, it's actually just a comment. It's just a comment. It's just a comment. And the other one is, it was a question, but maybe you could just talk about our partnerships as it relates to everything, but specifically the IPP in this case. Why does an APS look to partner with private companies to augment programs such as the Career Center or Montessori?
Well, certainly I think that the work of the IPP is to sort of leave no stone unturned. And so in this particular case, I think it is feasible for, as part of the IPP process, to look at, would it be efficacious to look at private companies to provide support for building some programs. So I would say I'd rather not pose that as sort of past or present, but really sort of future work of the IPP, and taking a look at the role of private companies as well.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to send myself live. And while I do that, I just want to say thank you so much to our community members as we go through our, you know, this virtual environment in which we have been for almost a year now. So thank you so much while we maneuver all of this. I just want to say that this thank you for your comments as well. Your comments, we do have them. We appreciate them, and they are reviewed by everyone involved in this process. I just want to mention again that on February 17th, we're going to have the second virtual community meeting. This information and the recording will be posted online on the IPP webpage. And Jonathan, of course, talked about the questionnaire. And if you have any questions, please email them to engage@apsva.us. We really appreciate you being with us, and we look forward to continuing this engagement with you. Team, if there's nothing else that you wish to share, I'm going to have folks just go home and be, you know, just go home and rest, or be home and rest. Nope. Thank you so much.